I thought I'd buried my past the night I walked out on my wife. But 5 years later, a single conversation revealed a secret so life-changing. It left me questioning everything I thought I knew. Hey everyone, glad to see you back here. I appreciate you taking the time to join me again. Before diving into today's story, I want to share something I'm really excited about. I've started a new YouTube channel called Soulful Chronicles. It's where I'll be posting more of these heartfelt and sometimes heartbreaking stories. If you get the chance, I'd love for you to check it out, leave a like and hit that subscribe button. You'll find the link down in the description. Now let's get into it. I can still picture the very first time I laid eyes on Laura. It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons in Boston where the air feels fresh but carries a whisper of the cold that's just around the corner. The streets were lined with leaves in fiery shades of gold and crimson, and the faint scent of them hung in the breeze. She was an intern at my office back then, clearly a bit lost as she tried to navigate the winding hallways and endless turns of the building. I remember stepping in to help her find her way, and when she turned toward me with that wide, appreciative smile, it stopped me in my tracks. There was something in her expression, warmth, sincerity, a kind of unplanned charm, that drew me in without warning. Those first few weeks quickly turned into months, and before I knew it, we were spending nearly every moment together. Our weekends became a ritual of discovery, getting lost in Boston's museums, trying out little Italian spots in the North End, walking hand in hand along the Charles River as the sun melted into the skyline. We laughed too loudly at each other's corny jokes, somehow finished each other's sentences without thinking, and found joy in the quiet, unremarkable moments most people overlook. Exactly 1 year after we met, we stood in front of a small group of our closest friends and family, promising each other forever. The ceremony was intimate, almost modest, but it felt perfect. We moved into a cozy little suburban home just outside the city, a place that, to us, felt like the start of something beautiful and lasting. Laura had just secured a solid position as an associate at a marketing firm, and I was steadily moving up the ladder at an insurance company. We fell into an easy rhythm with our home life. She enjoyed cooking, I handled the laundry and took the garbage out. It was simple, it was peaceful, and for a while, it felt like we were exactly where we were meant to be. I truly believed what Laura and I had built was strong enough to weather anything. But the thing about cracks is, they don't always start where you're looking. They sneak in through the unnoticed corners, hairline fractures you barely register until they've spread. At first, the changes were so small they almost felt harmless. Laura started getting home later and later, always with a reasonable excuse. Tight deadlines, last-minute campaign launches, client emergencies. And for a while, I bought it without question. She had always been driven, fiercely committed to her career, and I admired that about her. But something in her began to shift. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, just a subtle unease in the way she carried herself. Her eyes seemed to drift away even when she was sitting right in front of me, like her thoughts were tied to someplace far from where I was. Then there was the phone. It became a constant shadow to her, never more than an arm's length away. She even brought it into the bathroom. If it buzzed, she would glance at the screen, say nothing, and then excuse herself to another room to respond. When I asked, she'd smile lightly and say it was just a coworker, brushing my concern aside as though I was being silly. I told myself to trust her. I told myself it was stress, that she was under pressure and I needed to be supportive. So I tried, cooking dinner when she came home late, offering to drive her to work to spare her the traffic, even taking on extra chores so she could rest. She would thank me with a polite smile or a distracted "thanks, hon," but her warmth, the kind that used to make our home feel alive, was slipping away. It felt like holding on to sand, watching it pour through my fingers no matter how tightly I tried to keep it. The turning point came one still, ordinary Saturday morning. Laura mentioned she was heading out to get groceries, a chore we'd always done together. But this time she insisted she'd go alone. Something about the way she said it, too quickly without meeting my eyes, made my stomach twist. The second she closed the door behind her, my thoughts started racing. My pulse pounded in my ears as I sat at my laptop, pulling up our shared phone plan account. What I saw made my chest tighten. There was one number, always the same, unfamiliar and unlisted, appearing again and again. Some calls lasted just a couple of minutes, others stretched on for 30. And then I opened the text logs. That was worse. Dozens of messages at strange hours, midnight, 2 a.m., 6 in the morning. A pattern that didn't leave room for doubt. By the time she came back through the door, I forced a smile when she walked in, acting as though nothing was out of the ordinary. I helped her unload the grocery bags, nodded along to whatever small talk she made, and tried to keep my hands from shaking. On the outside I was calm. Inside my mind was a storm. The phone records had rattled me, but they weren't enough. I didn't just want suspicion. I needed proof, something undeniable. So when Laura casually mentioned that she had a late-night meeting at the office, I already knew what I was going to do. About 20 minutes after she left, I grabbed my keys and slipped into my car. I kept my headlights at a distance, following her through quiet, twisting suburban streets. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I saw her turn into the parking lot of a small hotel. My grip tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles went pale. I watched her step out of the car, moving quickly toward the entrance. And then he appeared. Tall, dark hair, dressed in jeans and a leather jacket. There was nothing business meeting about him. He walked up to her and pulled her into an embrace, not the polite hug of coworkers or old friends, but a long, lingering hold. The kind of hug that speaks of secrets shared in dimly lit rooms, of moments stolen when no one's supposed to be watching. I sat there, frozen in the driver's seat, my whole body rigid. A part of me wanted to throw the door open, march inside, and demand answers, shatter the lie right there on the spot. But another part of me, the part still clinging to the life we had built, kept me rooted in place. Eventually I started the engine and drove home. It was like moving through a fog. Every memory of us, our wedding, our first home, our late-night walks, seemed to crumble in my mind, scattering like broken glass. Every red light on the drive back felt like it was asking me a question I wasn't ready to answer. What are you going to do now? How could she do this to you? Laura came home a little before midnight. She didn't offer much, just headed straight for the shower, tossing over her shoulder, "Long meeting. I'm exhausted." I didn't respond. I just sat there in the living room, eyes fixed on the television, though I couldn't tell you what was on. My chest felt like it was caving in, anger, sadness, disbelief all knotted together into one crushing weight. There was no more room for excuses. No more benefit of the doubt. She was lying. She was unfaithful. And no matter how badly I wished I could pretend otherwise, I knew our marriage had just crossed a line it could never uncross. I didn't confront her right away. I told myself I needed to think, but the truth was, I needed time just to breathe. Time to keep my voice from shaking, to stop my thoughts from spinning so wildly that I couldn't even form a sentence. So I waited until the next afternoon, carrying the weight of what I'd seen like a stone in my chest. When Laura came home from work, I asked her to sit with me in the living room. There must have been something in my tone, because she paused in the doorway, eyes narrowing slightly, as though she already knew this conversation wasn't going to be about what to have for dinner. We sat at opposite ends of the couch, a gulf of space between us. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. For a few moments, the silence between us felt almost physical, thick, heavy, impossible to ignore. Finally I spoke. "Who is he?" My voice came out calmer than I expected, though I could feel the tremor underneath it. Her face went pale. I watched emotions flash across her features like clouds passing in front of the sun. Shock, guilt, and maybe, just maybe, a strange kind of relief, as if hiding the truth had been a weight she could finally set down. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The seconds stretched painfully between us, taut as a rope ready to snap. And in that moment I knew. Whatever she said next, life as I knew it was about to change. "It's not what you think," she finally murmured. I let out a short, bitter laugh, the kind that doesn't come from humor but from knowing you're being lied to. "I followed you," I said, my voice tight. "I know about the hotel. I know about the calls. So tell me, what exactly is it if not an affair?" Her eyes darted away and she began to stumble through her words. "He's someone I met through work. We started talking and I don't know. Things just got complicated." She reached for my hand, but I pulled back before she could touch me. My pulse was pounding, my chest aching, and it felt as though my heart was both racing and breaking at the same time. "Complicated?" I repeated, my tone sharper now. "You told me you were working late. You told me you had meetings. Those were lies, Laura." Her eyes welled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for this to happen. I was just unhappy." That word, unhappy, hit me harder than I expected. It was like a punch to the ribs, knocking the wind out of me. Suddenly, every small disconnect between us, every distracted glance, every late night at the office had a new, sharper edge. How long had she been unhappy? And for how long had she been searching for comfort in someone else, while I was still here thinking we were okay? Looking back, I realized I'd been living in a kind of willful ignorance. But once the truth was out, there was no putting it back in the box. We spent what felt like hours locked in a cycle, arguing, repeating ourselves, circling around the same jagged points. The betrayal. The lies. The way our trust had been ripped apart. Her voice carried this frantic undercurrent, almost pleading, as she swore it was nothing more than a mistake, just a lapse in judgment. She told me she still loved me as if that somehow made it better. But love, at least the kind I believe in, doesn't usually hide in midnight text messages and secret meetings in hotel parking lots. Eventually her tears ran out. What replaced them was something worse: resignation. I felt it in myself too, a heavy acceptance that no matter what either of us said, something between us had been permanently broken. I looked at Laura, then really looked at her, and it felt like I was staring at a stranger. The woman I once trusted with my whole heart was gone. In her place sat someone who could step so far outside of our vows, tear them to shreds, and still say she cared. In that moment I knew I couldn't stay. Our home, which had once been my refuge, now felt like a cage closing in on me. "I can't do this," I said quietly. I told her I needed space, time to figure out where to go from here. Was divorce inevitable? Or was there even the faintest scrap of something left to save? She broke down again, sobbing, apologizing over and over. But I felt strangely detached, as though the pain had burrowed so deep that I no longer had the strength to comfort her. That night, while she slept, I began moving through the house quietly, methodically. I packed a small bag, just the essentials, a few changes of clothes, some toiletries, important documents. On the nightstand, I left my wedding ring, its absence a statement I didn't have the courage to speak aloud. Beside it, I placed a short note: "I need to figure this out. Don't try to find me." Stepping out into the cool night air, I felt my chest tighten. I pulled the door shut softly behind me, the click echoing louder in my head than it should have. I didn't have a destination, only the certainty that I couldn't be there anymore. As I merged onto the interstate, the reality of what I'd done pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shift. I had walked away from our life, our future, without a plan, without a map. And yet, in that darkness, I kept telling myself it was the only choice I had left. I left without leaving a single breadcrumb behind. No forwarding address, no number she could call. Because staying would have been like slowly drowning, every day pulling me further under. Maybe I was running away. Or maybe I was just trying to keep myself alive. I drove for hours without a real plan, the miles stacking up behind me. I didn't stop until I found myself in Indianapolis, nearly 1,000 miles from Boston. It wasn't a deliberate choice, it was simply where I ran out of momentum. The highway had turned into a blur of red taillights and exit signs I didn't take, and when exhaustion finally caught up with me, I pulled off and decided this was as good a place as any to disappear. For the first couple of weeks, I drifted between budget motels, surviving on greasy takeout and bottled water. I felt stripped bare, like my skin had been peeled back and every nerve was exposed. Sleep came in fits, and when it did, it was heavy and dreamless. Eventually, I stumbled on a modest one-bedroom apartment tucked near a row of aging brick buildings. The rent was low and the place was far from perfect. Floors that groaned under your feet, paint flaking off the windowsills, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that no one here knew my name and no one was interested in my past. I found work at a small insurance brokerage in the city. It paid enough to keep me afloat, though it was a far cry from the career track I'd left behind in Boston. Still, there was comfort in the monotony. Wake up. Go to the office. Push papers around. Come home. Repeat. My coworkers were kind enough, but I kept my distance. I didn't share much beyond polite conversation. Eventually, they stopped asking about my life outside the office, and I was grateful for the silence. In the evenings, I wandered the city streets. Monument Circle, the quiet canals, little coffee shops tucked between old storefronts, places where I could blend in without anyone noticing I was alone. I'd often bring a book, not because I was deeply invested in the story, but because it gave me an excuse not to make eye contact. Still, my mind always found its way back to Laura. Back to the home we'd built, to the night everything shattered. I'd see couples walking hand in hand, leaning into each other over a shared meal, and something sharp would twist in my chest. A flash of envy followed by the familiar ache of what I'd lost. I often wondered if she ever thought about me, if I even crossed her mind. Was she still with him? Were they building the life I once thought would be ours? But even as those questions gnawed at me, I held on to the promise I'd made to myself the night I left. No social media, no reaching out to mutual friends, no fishing for scraps of news. Because the truth was, any answer would hurt. If I learned she was happy with him, it would crush me. If I learned she was miserable, I might find myself picking up the phone, offering comfort she no longer deserved. So I chose ignorance, convincing myself it was the only real path forward. The early months in Indianapolis passed in a kind of blur. My apartment remained bare, a sofa, a bed, and a small dining table. No pictures on the walls, no personal touches. Just a place to sleep between shifts at work. I lost track of weeks, sometimes months, burying myself in routine. And yet, somewhere inside the loneliness, I stumbled onto a strange kind of peace. For the first time since I could remember, there was no one to answer to, no shared life to maintain. I was unmoored from everything that had defined me, and while that was unsettling, it was also freeing in its own way. Still, the past had its ways of finding me, especially on sleepless nights. I'd lie in the dark and let the memories drift in. Our wedding day, the cramped but happy first apartment we shared, trips to the coast of Maine, quiet evenings tangled in blankets watching movies. Each memory burned in its own way, a wound that refused to heal. I kept asking myself the same questions. Could I have done more? Did I fail her without even knowing it? The thoughts circled endlessly, but answers never came. Then, one mild spring morning, almost a year after I'd first arrived in Indianapolis, I realized something that stopped me cold. I had gone an entire day without thinking of Laura. When the thought hit me, it felt wrong, almost disloyal, as if forgetting her for a single day was its own kind of betrayal. But it was also a sign. Proof that I might, just maybe, be moving on. Over time the heartbreak dulled. It wasn't the sharp, twisting pain in my gut anymore, it was more like an old scar, still there, still tender if pressed, but no longer consuming me. I started filling my time with things that had nothing to do with her. On weekends, I volunteered at a local animal shelter. I took up jogging along the trails just outside the city, letting the rhythm of my steps quiet my thoughts. Life wasn't thrilling. It wasn't full of big moments or grand joys. But it was steady, predictable, and safe from the kind of devastation I'd endured before. For the time being, that was enough. What I didn't know then was that the quiet, carefully rebuilt life I had created was already on a slow collision course with the past I'd tried so hard to leave behind. I never imagined that, after all these years, a truth about Laura would surface that would shake me to my core, undoing everything I thought I understood and leaving me more unsettled than I had been the night I walked away. 5 years slipped by in Indianapolis. 5 quiet, uneventful years, each one blending into the next. By then, streaks of gray had begun to show in my hair, and I had grown almost comfortable in my solitary routine. I still wasn't dating. The idea of letting someone close enough to hurt me again felt dangerous. I had acquaintances, a few casual friends from work in the animal shelter, but none of them knew the full story of how I had ended up here. I kept that chapter of my life sealed tight. Then came the day my carefully constructed distance from the past collapsed without warning. It was a heavy, humid Saturday afternoon, the kind where the air feels thick in your lungs. I was jogging along the canal, sweat stinging my eyes, when I slowed to catch my breath. That's when I heard it, someone calling my name. My real name. Not the one I introduced myself with in Indianapolis, but the name tied to the life I had left behind. Startled, I turned toward the voice. It was Cody. A familiar face from my old neighborhood in Boston. For a second I could only stare, my mind struggling to close the gap between then and now. My throat felt dry as I finally managed, How have you been? What's going on? Cody's smile was brief and didn't reach his eyes. There was something heavy in his expression, something that made my stomach tighten. I only know what I've heard, he said quietly. She didn't have much family around, just a friend or two. After that, I heard she was in and out of the hospital. I froze. Hospital? The word tasted strange in my mouth. He nodded, hesitating before adding, Nobody's really seen you, man. People tried to get in touch, but you were just gone. His words hung in the humid air, echoing in my head. Laura sick. Seriously sick. And I had spent years completely severed from her world, choosing not to know. A storm broke inside me. Anger. Guilt. Worry. Even after everything she had done, the thought of her fighting some illness alone made my chest ache. I had walked away to save myself, but had I also abandoned her in a time she might have needed someone? Cody scribbled down the name of the Boston hospital where she had been treated. I stared at the paper for a long time, my pulse quickening. Part of me wanted to tear it up, keep the wall between my present and my past intact. But another part, the part one thought I had buried, wanted to get in the car and drive east until I found her. Cody mentioned she might have been transferred to a specialized facility, but he wasn't certain. That evening, I sat alone in my nearly bare apartment, the quiet pressing in on me. On the coffee table in front of me lay a small slip of paper with the hospital's name and number scrawled across it in Cody's handwriting. I just stared at it. Part of me wanted to crumple it up, toss it in the trash, and go on pretending I knew nothing. Keeping my distance had been my way of surviving, and the thought of opening that door again, of letting her back into my mind, terrified me. The wounds from her betrayal were still there, raw beneath the surface, no matter how many years had passed. But then another part of me spoke up. The part that remembered the woman I had once loved. Not the one from the end but the one from the beginning. The woman whose laughter could make the worst day bearable. The one I had promised to stand beside, in sickness and in health. My hand shook as I picked up the phone and dialed. A nurse answered. She confirmed that Laura had been a patient there, but had recently been discharged for outpatient care. She couldn't share many details, privacy laws made sure of that, but there was something in her tone, a careful heaviness that told me this was serious. When I hung up, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like I just finished a sprint. That was the moment I realized my self-imposed exile had reached its end. Whatever had happened between us, whatever trust she had broken, didn't erase the fact that she might be facing something life-threatening. And no matter how much I told myself to walk away, I couldn't. The shock of her illness eclipsed the anger I'd carried for so long. I needed to see her. I needed answers. I needed to know if she was going to be okay. A week later, I was sitting on a plane bound for Boston. As the skyline came into view beneath the wing, a wave of memories crashed over me, some warm and vivid, others sharp enough to cut. At Logan Airport, I rented a car and typed the outpatient clinic's address into the GPS. My stomach twisted with anxiety as I drove, the streets growing more familiar with every turn. And even then, as the building came into sight, I still couldn't believe where this road had taken me. The clinic was a small, unassuming building tucked between a pharmacy and a row of office spaces, its glass doors smudged with fingerprints from the steady flow of patients. Inside, the waiting room hummed with quiet conversation and the rustle of paper forms. I spotted her almost instantly. Laura. She looked fragile. Her frame was thinner than I remembered, her posture slightly hunched as though the weight she carried wasn't just physical. A patterned scarf covered her head, where once her glossy brown hair had spilled over her shoulders. My chest tightened at the sight. The confident, sharp-witted marketing executive I had known was gone. In her place sat a woman visibly worn down by illness, clutching a folder of medical papers in hands that trembled. I approached slowly, unsure if she'd even recognize me after all these years. But the moment her eyes lifted and found mine, they widened with surprise, and then glistened with tears. "Daniel?" she whispered, her voice quivering. The noise of the room seemed to fade away. I opened my mouth to say something, but my throat refused to cooperate. Instead, I did the only thing that felt instinctively right. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms gently around her. She let out a soft, broken sob against my chest, her frail frame shaking. I felt my own eyes sting, my throat tightening until it hurt. We left the clinic together and walked a short distance to a small coffee shop. She ordered tea, her hands curled around the cup as if drawing warmth from it. I got coffee and said little, letting her speak. Her voice trembled as she told me about the last 5 years. The affair, how it had ended soon after I left, the regret that had shadowed her ever since. She had tried to track me down, she said, but every attempt led nowhere. Then came the diagnosis. First it was the exhaustion that wouldn't go away. Then the collapse in public that sent her to the hospital. And finally the blunt truth no one is ever prepared for: cancer. She spoke of the months of chemo, the sickness, the uncertainty. I sat there listening, my emotions twisted into a knot. I had built her image in my mind as the woman who had destroyed our marriage, cold, selfish, unrepentant. But sitting here now, seeing her fragile and open, that version of her dissolved. She was still the woman I had once loved. Flawed, yes. Human, absolutely. The question gnawed at me: after everything that happened, what did I owe her now? And was peace, real peace, something we could ever find between us? We finished our drinks, the silence between us weighted but not empty. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Daniel, there's something else. I need to tell you something," she said, her voice tight. My stomach knotted instantly. Was she dying? Did she need a transplant? I braced myself for the kind of news you can't prepare for. Laura took a shaky breath, her eyes fixed on mine. "We have a daughter." The air left my lungs in an instant. "A daughter?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. She nodded, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I found out I was pregnant not long after you left. At first I didn't know if she was yours or his. But a paternity test confirmed it. She's yours, Daniel. I tried to find you, God, I tried, but you had disappeared so completely." My hands curled into fists in my lap as a rush of emotions crashed over me: anger, sorrow, disbelief, and something I didn't expect. A flicker of hope. "Her name is Chloe," Laura continued softly. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small photograph and handed it to me. I stared down at the picture. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, with a mop of curly brown hair and a cautious, uncertain smile. Her eyes, my daughter. Tears blurred my vision before I could stop them. She's 4? I asked, my voice trembling. Laura nodded. She's been staying with my sister while I go through treatment. She knows about you, Daniel. She knows her father exists. I swallowed hard, my mind struggling to process the weight of what I had just learned. I had a child, a daughter I had never met. 4 years of her life had already passed, years I could never get back. How could I make up for that? Was it even possible? We sat there for hours as Laura filled in the missing years. She told me about Chloe's favorite bedtime stories, the way she giggled at silly voices, the way she scrunched her nose when she was thinking deeply, exactly the same way I did. With every detail I could feel something inside me shifting. The more I listened, the more I realized this wasn't just Laura's story anymore. That night, back in my hotel room, I lay on the bed staring up at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in around me. My mind wouldn't quiet. I had come to Boston searching for closure, ready to lay the past to rest. Instead, I had found something entirely unexpected, something that gave me a reason to stay. The next morning, I drove to Laura's sister's house, my chest tight with anticipation and nerves. When the door opened, I saw her, Chloe, peeking out from behind her aunt's leg. Her wide brown eyes studied me, cautious but curious. Then, after a moment, she gave the smallest, shyest wave. I raised my hand and waved back. And in that single, unguarded moment, I felt something shift deep inside me. I knew I wasn't leaving Boston. Not now. In the days that followed, I stayed. I went with Laura to her medical appointments, sitting in waiting rooms that smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, listening as doctors discussed her progress. I spent my afternoons with Chloe, reading her favorite bedtime stories, pushing her on the swings at the park, learning the little things about her that most fathers take for granted but I was only just discovering. We began to stitch together the bond we should have had from the start. I still don't know what the future holds. Between Laura and me lies an ocean of hurt, betrayal, and unanswered questions. But we also share something irreplaceable, our daughter. And for her, I choose to stay. I choose to show up. I choose to be the father she deserves. Time will tell if Laura and I can ever heal what was broken. But for now, my place is here. Where, truthfully, I should have been all along. Dear listeners, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.